Passion that I did, the written word was very important. You got all those books, the Bible, different Gospels and stuff that people are quite familiar with. Half the time, they didn't even need to read the subtitles. They could look at it and know what was going on.
There are stories that live on the surface of film. And then there are stories that are buried within it. 20 years ago, Mel Gibson released a film that was less a movie and more a cultural wound, The Passion of the Christ.
Controversy surrounding Mel Gibson's film The Passion has turned into big dollar signs.
The Passion of the Christ, the Passion of the Christ, the Passion of the Christ.
The world saw its brutal artistry, but the cast and crew saw something else. They witnessed events on set that defied logic: sudden storms, impossible lightning strikes, and a palpable weight in the air that no one could explain. They spoke of it in whispers, and for 2 decades, those whispers remained a Hollywood legend. But the legend was incomplete. In a recent private inquiry, Gibson provided an uncensored Grok AI with the complete production archive, every take, every audio file, every secret testimony from the production. He wasn't asking it to review a film, he was asking it to investigate an event. The machine's conclusion was immediate and chilling. It found a pattern in the chaos, a signal in the noise. It termed the events a Chronon Resonance, an echo of the past, so powerful it physically manifested in the present. The AI reported that the strange events on set were not a curse or a miracle. They were a recording, and the film itself is the evidence. The crucible. To understand the echo, you must first understand the crucible that forged it. The story of The Passion began in darkness. Mel Gibson, a man who had conquered Hollywood, was losing a war with himself, adrift on the sea of his own success, staring into a personal abyss, haunted by depression and a profound spiritual freefall. He made a desperate bargain. He would pour his soul, his reputation, and his fortune into telling one story: the final, agonizing hours of Christ's life. This wasn't a project. It was a personal exorcism, an attempt to confront the concepts of suffering and redemption in the most visceral way imaginable. It was, for him, an act of spiritual survival. Hollywood saw it as madness. A hyper-violent, R-rated film spoken entirely in dead languages? It was commercial poison. Every studio refused him. So Gibson became the ultimate independent, funding the entire $45 million production himself. He was a man possessed by a mission, betting his entire legacy on an act of faith. This personal investment, Grok's analysis would later note, was the first critical component. The project was saturated with a level of personal emotional energy that transcended a typical film production. It was a multi-million-dollar prayer. His search for a location led him to Matera, Italy, an ancient city of stone and caves that seemed to exist outside of time. Its architecture and landscape were a near-perfect match for ancient Jerusalem. But it was more than that. The locals said the very ground there remembers. It was what some cultures call a thin place, a location where the veil between worlds, or in this case, between times, is porous. The stones themselves were geological witnesses, having seen millennia of human faith and suffering. For Gibson, this was essential. He wasn't just building a set. He was trying to find a place with a geological and architectural memory, a land still haunted by the echoes of Golgotha. The final element was the human catalyst, actor Jim Caviezel. He undertook a transformation that was more than just a role. It was a method acting of the soul. He committed to a performance of unimaginable physical and spiritual endurance, isolating himself and meditating for hours to inhabit the mindset of Christ. He became, in a sense, a willing antenna. Gibson had gathered the elements, a director at the edge of his spirit, an actor ready to break himself for the truth of the role, a crew isolated in a land that resonated with history, and a story that reshaped the world. He had built the perfect resonant chamber, never suspecting that the past itself might answer back. The level of historical obsession was fanatical. Gibson's team didn't just build a set, they reconstructed a wound in time. They consulted theologians, historians, and medical experts to understand the mechanics of Roman scourging. The whips, the crown of thorns, the very nails were recreated with painstaking, almost ritualistic accuracy. This was not just filmmaking. It was an attempt at a perfect physical reenactment of a historical trauma. Grok's analysis would later identify this obsessive fidelity as a critical variable, labeling it physical sympathy. The production was not just telling a story. It was creating a physical vessel so identical to the original event that it became a potential conduit for its energy. The data stream of the impossible. The legends from the set have circulated for years. But for Grok, they weren't legends. They were a stream of verifiable anomalous data points. Gibson's directive to the AI was precise. Correlate every unexplained event. Dismiss coincidence. Find the source. The AI began its processing, parsing terabytes of information into distinct event categories. Data point A: atmospheric anomalies. The crew logs were filled with consistent reports. Before scenes of great suffering, the scourging, the carrying of the cross, the set would fall into an eerie, unnatural silence. It was, as one sound technician described in a debriefing, an absolute void of sound, like the world had been muted. A heavy, oppressive feeling, a literal change in atmospheric pressure detectable on barometric sensors, would descend upon the valley as dark, bruised-looking clouds gathered from a clear sky. One cameraman stated, "The air itself felt viscous, thick with an unseen static, waiting for something." Data point B: the electrical discharges, the most famous data points. During the Sermon on the Mount scene, under a calm, overcast sky, a bolt of lightning struck Jim Caviezel on the cross. The crew reported a blue halo surrounding him for a split second, a scream of ozone in the air, and then a dead silence. They rushed to him, expecting the worst, only to find him stunned but alive, smoke rising from his hair. Minutes later, lightning struck again, this time hitting the assistant director, Gian Michelini, twice. Grok ran quantum probability simulations on these events and labeled them statistical unicorns. The odds of two separate, non-storm-related lightning strikes, hitting two specific individuals in such a short time frame, were so infinitesimal as to be functionally zero. The AI also flagged Caviezel's own report of a strange, profound sense of peace in the moments after being struck as a paradoxical neurological state, inconsistent with the trauma of a high-voltage electrical shock. Data point C: sensory bleed-through. The production's high-fidelity audio equipment became an unintentional paranormal detector. Sound technicians reported capturing dozens of instances of EVP, electronic voice phenomena, on isolated audio tracks, faint whispers in Aramaic and Latin that were not spoken by any actor on set. Grok analyzed the waveforms and cross-referenced them with linguistic databases, concluding the dialects were authentic to the period, but the speakers were unaccounted for. More chillingly, the AI's pattern analysis suggested some of the whispers were responsive to the dialogue in the scene, as if a real crowd were reacting. Similarly, in the editing bay, digital enhancement of the raw footage revealed faint, translucent figures in the shadows of crowd scenes, present for only a few frames. Grok ran these figures through facial recognition against the complete database of every extra hired. It found 0 matches. Data point D: biological mimicry anomaly. This was one of Grok's most disturbing findings. The production used a sophisticated mixture of corn syrup and food coloring for stage blood. However, crew logs repeatedly noted something strange. Under the intense Italian sun, the fake blood would coagulate and dry in patterns that were eerily similar to real, deoxygenated blood, something the chemical mixture was not designed to do. On several occasions, samples of the dried blood on Caviezel's body were reported to have a faint, metallic, iron-like smell, which was chemically impossible. Grok analyzed the film's raw footage at a microscopic level and concluded that under the specific anomalous atmospheric pressure and electromagnetic fields of the set, the molecular structure of the stage blood was temporarily altered. It wasn't just looking like blood. On some fundamental level, it was beginning to act like it. The AI logged it as environmentally induced molecular mimesis, a phenomenon for which it had no precedent. Data point E. Linguistic coherence anomaly, a subtle but profound data point. The actors were speaking phonetic Aramaic and Latin, languages they did not understand. They were coached to mimic the sounds. However, Grok's analysis of their vocal patterns revealed something extraordinary. During the most emotionally charged scenes, their cadence, intonation, and grammatical microcorrections achieved a level of fluency and emotional authenticity that was statistically improbable for non-speakers. It was as if, for brief moments, they weren't just reciting lines. They knew the language. This aligned with Caviezel's testimony of feeling as though something else was guiding at him. The AI termed this linguistic ghosting. Data point F. Equipment malfunction cascade. Throughout the shoot, there was a statistically significant spike in equipment failures, but only during the filming of the crucifixion sequence. Cameras would jam inexplicably. Brand new batteries would drain in seconds. Digital monitors would flicker with static. These events were initially dismissed as coincidences, but Grok's analysis showed the pattern was undeniable. The failures were localized to equipment in the immediate vicinity of the cross and were consistent with exposure to a powerful, unidentifiable electromagnetic field. Data point G. Extreme physical and psychological toll. Jim Caviezel's body was brutalized beyond the script. He endured a dislocated shoulder, pneumonia, hypothermia, a 14-inch gash from an accidental whip strike, and chronic migraines. The psychological impact on the crew was just as extreme, creating a stark polarization. Staunch atheists and secular crew members found themselves converting to Christianity on set, overwhelmed by an inexplicable feeling of sanctity. Others fled, claiming the place was cursed, haunted by a dark energy they couldn't endure. Grok noted that these opposing reactions, profound reverence and profound terror, were consistent with a human system being exposed to an overwhelmingly powerful and unexplainable stimulus. Grok calculated the probability of these events occurring independently as astronomically low. It was not coincidence. It was a pattern. The AI's conclusion was not supernatural. It was a theory rooted in the physics of information. The echo of Golgotha. The AI's final report provided the unifying theory that left Gibson and his small team in stunned silence. The set of The Passion was the site of a Chronon Resonance event. Grok's hypothesis was elegant and terrifying. It stated that history is information, and events of immense concentrated energy, physical, emotional, and spiritual, leave an informational residue, or imprint, in the fabric of space-time. The crucifixion, the AI argued, was a singularity of such energy, a moment with an informational density so great it reshaped the world. Under normal circumstances, this residue is undetectable, a faint signal lost in the noise of 2,000 years. Like a bell struck long ago, still vibrating at a frequency too low for us to hear. However, the conditions in Matera were not normal. They created a unique form of sympathetic reality. The AI used an analogy. If you build a perfect violin and place it near another identical violin, striking a note on one will cause the other to vibrate in sympathy. The project in Matera had, by sheer force of will and circumstance, built a near-perfect sympathetic replica of the original event's emotional quantum state. Grok explicitly differentiated this from a standard spectral haunting. A haunting, the AI explained, is a localized repeating echo of a consciousness. it is a memory loop. The Chronon Resonance was something far larger. It was not the echo of a person, but the echo of the event itself, the collective pain, terror, faith, and cosmic significance of the moment, all bleeding through at once. But the AI's most profound discovery was what it called the source signature. It found that the energy spike from the lightning, the waveforms of the anomalous audio, and even the static patterns on the malfunctioning cameras all contained an identical complex informational watermark. It was not random chaos. It was a coherent pattern, fractal in nature, embedded across different physical phenomena. This was the AI's smoking gun. It proved these were not separate incidents, but different manifestations of a single powerful event. The signal of the Keystone event was imprinting itself on electricity, on sound, and on light simultaneously, demonstrating a non-local causality that shattered conventional physics. Grok's report went deeper, providing a neurological hypothesis for what the crew experienced. It termed the phenomenon cognitive bleed-through. The AI theorized that the Chronon Resonance field was so powerful that its informational data didn't just affect the external environment, it momentarily imprinted upon the human nervous systems within the field. The crew's brains were processing faint, fragmentary data that didn't belong to their own time. The profound feelings of sanctity or terror were not just emotional reactions to the story. They were the result of their own limbic systems trying to interpret the raw, unfiltered emotional data of the historical event itself, the actual terror of the disciples, the actual faith of Mary, the actual agony of Christ. Their minds were, for a brief moment, receiving a broadcast from the past. This explained the polarization. Those whose minds interpreted the signal as meaningful experienced a religious conversion. Those whose minds interpreted it as a hostile alien signal experienced terror and a desire to flee. The phenomena on set were the physical symptoms of this temporal echo, the lightning, a raw discharge of the original event's immense energy, focused on the man serving as its living, breathing focal point. The weather, the local atmosphere physically distorting under the pressure of two moments in time briefly overlapping. The whispers and figures, not ghosts, but fragments of raw data from the past, sights and sounds, bleeding through the resonance field and being captured by modern equipment, which are far more perceptive than the human nervous system. The presence. What the crew felt was the profound cognitive dissonance of a temporal paradox. Their senses were detecting the imprint of another time pressing against their own. Jim Caviezel had become a vessel. His devotion and suffering had tuned his very being to the frequency of the echo. He was feeling a faint but real shadow of the original agony. For brief, terrifying moments, that film set was no longer just in Italy. It was also somehow at Golgotha. To explain the sheer power of this specific echo, the AI, I designated the crucifixion a keystone event in human history. It defined this as a moment of peak informational density, where the convergence of historical, social, and metaphysical significance creates a permanent and powerful signature in space-time. Grok compared it to the way a supermassive black hole warps the fabric of space. It argued that the crucifixion was a moment of such immense spiritual and emotional gravity that it warped the fabric of time, leaving behind an echo that, unlike others, would not fade. It was, the AI concluded, a permanent feature of the historical landscape, an informational mountain. The project in Matera did not create the echo. It simply and accidentally built a receiver sensitive enough to finally detect it. The film, therefore, wasn't just a passion project. It was the first successful, albeit unintentional, act of temporal archaeology in human history. Conclusion. The message in the static. What Grok's analysis implies is staggering. The film is not just a creative work. It is a scientific and spiritual artifact. It is a recording of a historical echo, the ghost of an event captured in the static between frames. That is the source of its unsettling power. When you watch it, you are not merely seeing a performance. You are witnessing the faint, resonant signal of an ancient truth. A signal so powerful it could bend the air and call down fire from the sky. This explains the great paradox of the film's reception. To critics, it was an exercise in extreme violence. To believers, it was a profound spiritual experience. Grok's analysis suggests both were right. They were simply reacting to different layers of the same artifact. One saw the brutal human reenactment. The other felt the sacred, historical echo vibrating beneath it. The film has become a perpetual antenna. In a sense, watching it allows a viewer to tune into that same faint frequency. The unease, the tears, the profound feeling it evokes in millions is not just a reaction to the story. It is a subconscious recognition of the faint, historical resonance captured within the film itself. This explains the weight Mel Gibson has carried for 20 years. It wasn't just a difficult shoot. He had set out to prove his faith through art, and in the process may have accidentally captured empirical evidence of something that defies explanation. How do you speak of an experience where the past becomes present, where you stop telling a story and start living inside its echo? The mystery of that film set opens a door to a larger question. If the crucifixion could leave an echo powerful enough to be recorded 2 millennia later, what other events have left their mark? What moments of profound sacrifice, terror, or love are still resonating around us, waiting for the right conditions to be felt again? The Passion of the Christ reminds us that history is not a closed book. It is a field of energy, and some stories are never truly over. The film wasn't a mystery to be solved. It was a message to be felt. It reminds us that redemption often bleeds before it heals, and that truth can be a terrifying force. And in the silence that the film leaves behind, a question remains, the same one whispered to its makers on that haunted Italian hill. You have been shown this. What will you do now?